one of the deemed greatest fiascos of modern time was the introduction of New Coke.
Yeah.
Now, you see this entire fiasco also as a product of kind of overthinking on one hand and going to snap judgments at the same time.
Not understanding the complexity of snap judgments. I mean, New Coke, I can demonstrate this right here. This is what led to the New Coke fiasco. Pepsi was going around doing a Pepsi challenge, right? 2 identical cups. One is Coke, one is Pepsi. You don't know which is which, and I'm a dedicated Coke drinker. They say, take a sip of each, right? Sip, sip, tell me which one you prefer. And I say, that one tastes better. And then they say, lo and behold, it's Pepsi. Right? Coke saw this, panicked, and changed their formula because it turns out that an incredible percentage of Coke drinkers preferred Pepsi in this blind taste test.
On their first little sip.
On their first little sip. What better evidence could that be that Pepsi's a better drink than Coke, right? So they've got to change it. So they change the thing, and of course it's a disaster. Why was it wrong to conclude that they ought to change Coke from this test? Because Pepsi stacked the deck. They understood the sort of fickle nature of snap judgments, and they created a test that they would win. And the way they did that was that they asked people just to take a sip. When we just take a sip of a drink, we are almost always drawn to the sweeter of the two drinks. Right?
Of which Pepsi is sweeter.
Pepsi is sweeter than Coke. Pepsi will always win a sip test with Coke. If, on the other hand, you ask people to drink the whole can, they're inclined, less likely to like the sweet one because the sweetness becomes cloying, and they'll go for the not so sweet one, Coke. If Pepsi had done the Pepsi challenge, only you had to drink the whole can, they would not have won. Coke would have won, right? There's a case where how you measure someone's snap judgment, in other words, makes a huge impact on the answer that you get.
Well, in fact, you have a whole critique of market research, my chosen profession, and especially focus groups.
Yes,
Let's
which I think
that.
suffer from this problem over and over again, which is that they assume that if someone has a reaction to something, that people, a snap judgment, that, you know, they say, well, which drink do you prefer? And now tell me, why do you prefer this one to that one, right? And they assume that just because we can accurately say I prefer one to another, we can also provide an explanation of why we prefer one to another, and we can't. One of the greatest and most important truths of snap judgments is that they come from our unconscious, and as a result they come from a part of the brain that we have no understanding of. It's outside of our awareness. Our unconscious is a little box in our brain that we can't break into, right? It's the black box. You can't ask someone to explain something that they have no knowledge of. So what do people do in that situation? They make up stories. And I talk a lot about how the stories that people make up when they are required in these formal settings to explain why they have the feelings they do are nonsense. And more companies have made more disastrous decisions by literally interpreting the stories that consumers tell. Then it's a tremendous problem in the world of marketing.
Well, it's a perverse irony, isn't it, that now we're using people who are overanalyzing snap judgments.
Yes, exactly.
So you got the worst of all worlds.
And it requires, I mean, when I tell this to people like yourself in the market research profession, first of all, many of them have deep suspicions about the efficacy of focus groups. But also they recognize, many of them warm to it because they recognize what I'm arguing for is that the market researcher has to bring some level of skill and interpretation and sophistication to the products of market research.
You have to be an anthropologist.
You've got to be an anthropologist. You're not a statistician. And that's the thing, that people fell into this. They thought it was simple gathering of statistics. It's not. It requires a brain and some interpretation and some thoughtfulness. And that's the lesson, and one of the lessons of Blink, which is that when we're dealing with these enormously complex snap judgments, we can't take them at face value. We've got to understand where they're coming from.